So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to have you here tonight. Welcome to our Women in Health series, brought to you by Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. This is the second installment in the series, and I'm delighted to be here tonight to discuss the topic, the very important topic of peer coaching. I am here with my colleague, Dr. Salsen. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Salsen Abdelrazik. I'm the Chair of Medical Education at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi, and I'm also a hospitalist.
And my name is Dr. Pascal Anglade. I'm a gastroenterologist at Cleveland Clinic as well, and I also serve as the Director for Physician Experience. So before I forget, I need to say that tomorrow is International Women's Day, and I would like to congratulate everybody on this particular day, and to say that we're particularly happy to bring this topic on this specific day because we really do think that it impacts women specifically. So thank you for being with us tonight. This is, as I mentioned, the second installment in the series. This was the first one. We met 3 months ago and discussed a very important topic of gender equity in healthcare. If you, for any reason, missed that first one, please feel free to look us up there on YouTube and listen should you want to hear more about this very essential topic as well. All right, let's delve into it. All right, what do these people have in common? President Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, Hillary Clinton, Celine Dion, and Bill Gates. So when you see these people on the same slides, what comes to mind as commonality with all these people?
So there are a few things, right?
They're all very well known, easily recognizable. What else do we know?
All rich.
Oh, they're all very rich, definitely. They're all considered certainly leaders in their respective fields. So all these things come to mind, but the lesson here to be learned from this slide is really the fact that all these people have actually used coaching to get to where they are. And I think when we think about coaching, oftentimes we think about it as a tool to get to where we are, but these guys are really at the pinnacle of their different industries, and yet still believe in coaching and still get coached at this point in their career when they're so well known and so well established. And I think that's the first lesson for me for coaching, is that coaching is something that you can use early on to ramp up your career, to get you to where you want to be, or to get you off of a plateau. But it's something that you need to continue to get to be able to stay at the sort of continue to grow and continue to reach whatever pinnacle you're aiming for professionally. So these are really sort of what I wanted to share with this slide, because I found that actually very surprising to hear that these 5 people still definitely used coaching. So when we look at the history of coaching through time, I think intuitively we all understand the concept of coaching coming from entertainment and sports. I mean, a coach for a basketball team, a soccer team, we all understand that concept. And then in education, again, pretty intuitive, because as children, and adults, we definitely get coached by our teacher or people or mentors in education. And then in the executive suite, it's almost become de facto that most executive suite members get coaches, and so many books have been written about different types of coaching that are essential for executives. And then in industry as well, when you look at automotive industry, in engineering, again, not only leaders get coached, but teams get coached. And coaching has been shown to actually improve cohesiveness within teams, as well as effectiveness, efficiencies of teams as well, team dynamics. So it's really important to understand that this is a well-established practice throughout, but here we are. What about healthcare? What about healthcare? And I want to bring up this article from 2011, which is, I think, when the concept of coaching physicians came into sort of public awareness, just general awareness as something that may be beneficial. So this article came out in 2011, and it was written by Dr. Atul Gawande. Dr. Gawande is a surgeon based in Boston. And what this article describes is the fact that Dr. Gawande was hoping to get coached in the operating room, meaning he was willing, and it takes a lot of courage, he was willing to bring an older semi-retired surgeon to his operating room to watch him operate. So this second surgeon stood in the background and watched him. And he watched everything. And some of the feedback that was obtained was actually fairly surprising because it went beyond surgical technique. It went to comments like your light is too low, or the team dynamic could really be improved. The communication really breaks down at hour 5 of the surgery, or there are too many distractions in your operating room. The beepers are going off all the time. So a lot of these very valuable feedback only was available to Dr. Gawande once he brought somebody in to watch him operate.
It was really remarkable, of course. I mean, it ended up being published in the New Yorker, right? And the reason being that up until that time, you know, physicians or healthcare professionals in general, as you know, oftentimes we're taught that, you know, it's great, you're going to get training up until a certain point, and then you're an independent practitioner, right? And so you're let out into the world and you're supposed to just sort of do what you do. And oftentimes we're in spaces that are really exclusive to us and the patient, or us and some other healthcare workers, but not to peers to look at and critique. And so I think Dr. Gwande's, you know, thought to sort of expose what might be seen as vulnerabilities to his colleague or to a peer really was something that caught the attention of the public, right? And that's why it was sort of spun out into a TEDx talk.
Yes, and if you're interested in hearing the TEDx talk, we have the link at the bottom of the slide. But I do want to share a personal experience that I had. So I'm a gastroenterologist, as I mentioned, so I spent a lot of time doing procedures, doing endoscopies. And one day while I was doing an endoscopy, I was tackling a specific lesion, and I asked one of my colleagues to come in because I wanted an extra set of eyes on this particular lesion. And he walked in and he said, I'll never forget, he walked in and said, Pascal, the bed is too low. And I thought, well, it's because you're much taller than I am. That's why the bed is too low for you. No, 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 seriously, you're completely hunched over. The bed is too low. So I raised up the bed a bit. We finished the case. And then over the next few weeks, I started raising the bed and realized, you know what, my back hurts a lot less. My shoulders are not as strained after long cases. Maybe there was a point there. But I would have never known had I not had anyone come in and actually give me that feedback and coached me. So I think this is where we can all learn from other people.
Yeah, so we're going to talk, before we move forward, we're going to talk about definitions. Yes. And we're going to specifically talk about what do we mean by being a peer, if you don't mind. Right. And so, you know, we probably all have some intuitive sense of what that actually means. But we wanted to do something a little braver, opening ourselves up, being a little vulnerable here. We wanted to do an interactive exercise with all of you who are on. And so this will just require for you to have some devices available to you that are connected to the internet. And I'm going to ask, perfect, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen here. Just 1 second, everyone. You should start seeing my screen. Perfect. And so you can see at the top of the screen, there's a website that is www.menti.com. If you can just go to that website on your devices. We're going to be doing the same in a second. Doesn't require you to download an app. Just go ahead and go to the website. And then once you're in that website, you should start seeing prompts to put in a code. Okay. And the code is up here. So it's 1994836.
1994836.
Yes. And so you should see an identical slide on your phone. And it's going to ask you to essentially put 3 words that are essentially synonym for peer in your mind. And we're going to just sort of watch the responses as we move forward. Sorry. Okay. So we have a response. Come on, guys.
All right. 4.
Okay, a little more responses. People probably need time.
Well, good.
We're starting to develop a little bit of a word cloud.
Yes.
Okay, keep it going. You can put in more than 3 words if you'd like.
Keep going.
Keep it going, guys.
I think we're getting quite a nice
Give about 18 responses, but keep it going. Okay. Colleague is definitely winning here. Keep it going.
We're developing quite a nice crowd there.
And then we just work. I can't spell. Okay. So really cool. What we're seeing is, it looks like colleague is number one here. And then we've got, oh, maybe friend actually. Friend looks like it's actually
Same.
so, oh yeah, got quite a bit of a response. So friend, colleague, and partner. And then we have a lot of different things. I love confidant, coach for sure. Quite a lot, someone to learn from, someone equal in ability, right? And so what we're getting at here, it's clear that, you know, that essentially what we're seeing is one, that appears somebody who is of equal stature, right? So we're talking about friends and colleagues and partners, right? And then we're seeing a lot of sort of adjectives about, you know, about sort of the qualities in that peer, being supportive, right? Being a buddy, right? Being a fellow. And so you know, these ideas are not that far from the literature. In fact, quite similar. And I think moving forward, we will take these sort of these definitions, right? So the idea is somebody who's of equal stature and somebody who may have a personal relationship to you or some sort of a component of a personal obligation towards you, right? So all these things with support and so on. So I still see some things coming in. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And we'll hopefully get back to our slideshow here. Sorry. Okay.
I'm going to reshare my screen.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. So, what we've learned essentially is that we all sort of have a very similar understanding of what a peer is. And so if we move to the literature and look at, well, what are the definitions related to coaching, right? And so that gets a little bit more hairy, because you can imagine there's quite a few words or a lot of terminology in the literature around similar processes. So you'll find coaching, you'll find mentoring, you'll find training, right? Those are the top three sort of that talk about very similar constructs. And so if we take them one by one, just so that we can sort of dig into really the scope that we want to talk about today. So training generally refers to the process of the acquisition of new skills, right? And so we're not going to be talking much about training today, okay? Mentorship is a relationship that usually involves an expert and a mentee, right? Someone who's not the expert, and essentially is a much more prescriptive sort of guiding, advising, sort of giving counsel type relationship towards, of course, pre-specified goals that both have agreed on. The key, now mentorship can include coaching as a strategy, right? But generally mentorship definitely has a hierarchy, right? Coaching also has multiple definitions, but most of the good news is most of those definitions have some very similar components, right? So we've put up a couple of definitions here for you, and I want to really focus in on sort of some keywords in these definitions. And you'll find throughout, essentially, peer coaching is a voluntary relationship, right? It's non-competitive. It is, by definition, collaborative, and it's of someone who is of equal knowledge, right? Or seen as equal professional stature, right? And that process always involves some form of self-evaluation, reflection, right? And critical, formative, and very consistent coach feedback, right? And of course, all of this is towards essentially specific goals, right? And usually those goals involve a set of skills that you already have, right? So it's either refining those skill sets, improving on them, but it's not a completely different set of skills, right? Otherwise, we're entering the training realm.
Mhm.
And so the most important thing to take away from these definitions is essentially that it is a reflective process, right, with tons of feedback. And so we have a specific definition that we love, so we thought we'd share this one with you, which is essentially that, of course, peer coaching is a confidential process, but essentially what happens in that relationship is that you reflect, you expand, you refine, you build, you share, you teach, you do research, and eventually you're essentially trying to either solve problems, i.e. move yourself to the next level or next step, or just sort of not necessarily have a problem, but develop a certain skill set. So this is an oldie but goodie. We like it. It's from 1991.
And not in healthcare.
And not in healthcare. Yeah. It's from the education literature. But absolutely something that we thought was quite golden. So having said that, if you don't mind, we're going to talk now about whether what do we know about the efficacy of these coaching relationships? Are they effective, right? Okay, and again, and again. So if we look at the literature, it is fraught with a few challenges. The first is that most of the literature is essentially composed of small studies with different study designs, different outcomes that have been looked at, right? Anything from faculty development to just engagement to all these other different objectives. So it's really hard to come up with one general statement about effectiveness. But what we can say, one, most of these studies are from North America and the Western world generally, and two, that almost all, I don't think I've read one that hasn't essentially come up with supported conclusions towards coaching, okay? Now, coaching and mentoring is oftentimes used, again, interchangeably in the literature. So we decided to pick a couple of specific studies we'd like to talk about today because they did focus on women, right? And so the study that you see here is a study that was done in the world of engineering. And we all know that engineering suffers from a very similar fate in medicine, and that the workforce actually, it's different because engineering actually has less women in the workforce, right? And medicine has quite a few women in the workforce. Actually, the majority of the healthcare workforce is women, but they're just not at leadership positions, right? Engineering has a pipeline issue. And so in the world of engineering, essentially what they found is that women tend to sort of drop off quite early on in the career trajectory. So in this study, they essentially paired entering engineering majors, so entering freshmen in university, and they paired them with what they're calling mentors, but really are peers. They paired them with trainees or university students that are sort of in their more senior years, so a junior or senior. And what they did was they followed them out over a year, so it's not a very long-term study here. And they looked at issues related to a sense of belonging or self-efficacy, the sense of sort of challenge within the field. So these are sort of ineffable sort of constructs that are difficult to measure. But they also looked at the sort of more objective, the construct of, essentially, was attrition affected, right? Did they stay in the field? And what they found is quite early on, as you can see on the left-hand side here, that quite early on, the group that were assigned female mentors, so I'm sorry I hadn't said earlier, all 150 entering trainees were assigned either a female mentor, a male mentor, or no mentor at all, right? Sort of randomized. And what they found is that the group that was assigned female mentors generally felt that they belonged in the field way more than the other two groups. And in fact, that improved over time. And these differences that you see are statistically significant. So it really is quite an interesting study that were, in a very short period of time, they were able to pick up those differences in those groups.
And I just want to add that the feeling of belonging is so essential in your ability to blossom in any field that you're in, right? And as we often talk about the imposter syndrome, which we tend to suffer more from as women, I think that feeling of belonging is essential in combating that syndrome and letting us, blossom in our environment. So I really like this particular
Absolutely.
study.
So we chose that
Yeah.
particular construct. There's also a self-efficacy and other constructs also with very similar changes seen. And then when they looked at attrition, essentially 100% of the women who were assigned women mentors stayed in the field at the end of the year. Whereas you can see between the male and the control groups, that was not the case, unfortunately. And again, these changes were statistically significant. So I really like the study because it looked at specifically mentoring. And I think, honestly, this was more peer coaching. If we can go to the next slide. So here's another study that was at the University of Indiana, which looked at essentially female emergency room residents. And they were over sort of a long period of time, they had multiple cohorts. They, at the end, had enrolled 72 residents, and each of those residents were assigned a mentor who was a female and this was a mentorship in its essence, really a practicing female physician who'd been either in the community or in the academic medical center. But they also provided them with peer group activities and coaching and so on. And they followed them out for 6 years, which is really nice. So they went back at the end of 6 years and surveyed everybody who had gone through this program. And, 46 of those individuals replied to that survey. And essentially, as you can see, the vast majority felt extremely inspired and guided by this experience, both by their specific experiences with their mentors, but also a significant percentage felt that they benefited from these peer group discussions and sort of interactions. So much so they actually go on and list sort of some of the objective measures that were achieved during this time, changes in policy at the center, academic promotions for certain women, and so on. But clearly, again, a study that seems to essentially support the idea of peer coaching. So having said that, we're not going to spend too much time because on the studies, because as we said earlier, there aren't that many in the healthcare field. And most of the information we know really is anecdotal. So we're going to spend the rest of the session on a very long anecdote, which is our story. And I'm going to pass it over to Pascal.
Thank you. So I think it's really important for us as we share our paths to sort of take a step back and give you a sense of who we are and where we came from. So this is my path. So I was born in Canada to Haitian immigrants. And I grew up essentially in Canada for most of it. I spent a couple of years when I was a teenager in Haiti before heading back to Canada for undergrad, and then moving to the US for medical school, internship, residency, fellowship, and then practice. And then in 2011, had the opportunity to move to West Africa, where I worked for 3 years before making my way to the UAE in 2014. So that's my journey to the world.
Mine was a little less exotic. So I was born to Sudanese immigrant parents, and I spent essentially my entire childhood through most of my high school years in the US, and then had a very brief sojourn in Egypt in the 1990s. That's for another webinar. Went back to the US and spent the rest of my training there, my undergraduate, my postgraduate medical school and residency and so on, and then eventually came to the UAE, seems like a long time ago, 12 years ago, as a traveling spouse, and started off as an academic hospitalist in one of the hospitals here. And I was very lucky to be joined by my colleague here afterwards in the UAE. This is sort of where we met.
So this is where we met. Although it's funny, while we were reviewing our journey, we realized that we lived blocks away from each other for 8 years in New York City and actually never met.
And had actually a lot of social connections there as well.
A lot of people in common, but it just hadn't happened. So this is the story of our relationship. So this is how this starts. So I moved to the UAE in 2014, and a little bit out of my element in terms of it's a new practice, a new country, it's a new continent. And I was looking for information. I had some questions about the lay of the land in terms of healthcare, and reached out to a friend of mine who I knew some people in the region, and she connected me to another friend who then said, listen, I think you should meet this Dr. Sapsan. I think she would be able to answer all of the questions. So 3 or 4 people removed, from Sapsan, but eventually somebody gives me her number, and I send her a text message, and I say, hey, my name is Pascal. I have some questions. Do you have time? Can we meet for a coffee?
Right, and so coffee with a stranger, why not? And so I obliged and we met for coffee. And
I think this is, I guess, lesson number one, and we'll come back to some of those lessons later, but I think lesson number one was that how easy it was for me. And I think easy because indeed it's another woman to say, let me just ask her for a little bit of her time to spend with me and to share some of her knowledge and expertise without really offering much of anything in return, right? And I felt comfortable, and Safsan indeed obliged and gave me an hour or whatever it was of her time to actually answer some of my questions. So I went in, I'm a very organized person by nature. So I went in with all my questions. I had an agenda for our coffee, and I went in with all my questions, and Safsan dutifully answered all my questions. And this was really our first meeting.
Right. And you know, actually, she knew exactly what she wanted to ask. She asked her questions. It was a very pleasant transaction, and it only could have happened, honestly, because it was another woman, right? It's much harder for me to, as you can imagine, social connotations and so on, for me to, meet a totally strange, a stranger who would have been a male at a coffee shop, right? So it was much easier, and I think that's a really important sort of.
I think to me, it's lesson number one.
Yeah, it's lesson number one. It's just easy. And so yeah.
So then what happens? Well, nothing. For a few years there, really, truly nothing happens. This coffee dates back to 2015. Then 2016, we both separately, a few months apart, joined Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. And
without knowing
that, and we essentially run into each other in the hallway. And because our clinical practices or non-clinical practices are so different, there was really not much overlap. So we see each other and recognize each other, and we have a very casual sort of hello relationship. But then in 2017, something that you'll see can only happen between two women happens to us. Safsan gets pregnant with baby number 4, and her colleagues want to throw her a baby shower. Now, I remember how Safsan extended herself back in 2015 for that coffee. And I said, well, listen, I would love to extend myself to Safsan. Let me host this baby shower in my home. Bring all your people, bring your friends, your family, whoever, and I'm going to host it in you. So we do. We have the baby shower in my home. It's a lovely event. And I get to meet the people that are around her, a bit of her network. And then a couple of months later, baby is born. Safsan invites me to her house to meet the baby. And this is where we sit down for an afternoon and speak for 6 hours straight. And realize, honestly, when I left, that I could have spoken to her for another 12 hours without ever running out of things to say.
That was the pesky baby.
Yeah, the baby kept us from doing that. But really, it was really the realization that, I think there is really truly something there. Although this is essentially only our third meeting.
Right.
But because those meetings had been in such, the baby shower was such a major milestone in somebody's life, having another child, were such a big events, that I think our relationship sort of moved in leaps and bounds very quickly and very deeply at that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do we go from that meeting? Again, in the elevator. At Cleveland Clinic, we run into each other. And at that point, and I should say that we're very privileged to be able to have some time for professional development. And Safsan was looking for something truly meaningful that she wanted to do with her professional development. And in the elevator, I shared with her the fact that I had gone to a conference the year before that I found was transformative. And I was going again. And I said, well, why don't you just go ahead and come? It's a little bit late.
Right.
You may have trouble registering, but if you can register, go ahead and register and come. And I think it will be of value to you. Right. Of course, it's too late to find more housing at that point in Boston. So I said, listen, I already have an Airbnb. You can go ahead and share it.
And you really don't know anyone and you've traveled with them. But, so anyway, the idea here again being that sort of ease of being able to not go from meet you in a coffee, see you in a very sort of intimate gathering, and then live with you for several days, right? And so, and in that process of the conference, we essentially had an epiphany. We did.
I think we have to give it a little bit more context.
Right.
The conference was on essentially professional development for women in healthcare. And so a topic very timely for both of us. We're both mid-career, so it was a very timely topic. And what happened is that after every talk, after every day, we would sit down and we would debrief and talk and sort of go back and forth between ideas, sharing, what do we bring back to our institution? What do we bring back to this part of the world? How do we use this to move ourselves and others forward? And it was such an enlightening experience, very different from the one that I had the year prior going to the same conference by myself. That I thought, aha, this is really something. I think there's something there that is very, very, very different and valuable, right?
Yeah. And I've been to many conferences, of course, in my life, and I had the same experience, which is, my gosh, just having someone to debrief about and actually put forth some action plans, not necessarily action itself, but at least the plan towards that action was absolutely, for me, extremely transformative, right? So that's really what made that conference really impactful. And so then we actually came with a lot of excitement.
So we came back very enthusiastic and thought, well, this is great. We're going to take this up. We're going to make this exponential, and we're going to go ahead and open up this newfound relationship to others, and realize that really we had underestimated the importance of the prior years of that our relationship had blossomed during.
Right.
And I think that's when we realized that having this as a bigger group really wasn't going to work that well. And we went back to the one-to-one framework that had worked for us better. And we decided to stick to that. So coming back to Abu Dhabi, there's a couple of things that we committed to. But the first and biggest, I think, piece of that commitment was time commitment. And when I say time, I mean 30 minutes per week.
That's all we could really
figure out. Yeah. That's all we could find to actually sit down, but protected those 30 minutes fiercely.
Right.
And said, this is the time during which we are going to meet and have these sort of very sort of insightful conversations, bring up topics that are of interest to each other. And this is how this started, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so one of the things that we had noticed is essentially this was, that peer counseling was essentially moving us from our area of comfort, right? So if you look at, you've probably all seen this slide before, right? So this small circle where we all operate, right? This comfort zone, right? Into sort of, the larger circle where we really want to be, right? So that's sort of where all that magic is, where all your aspirations really have been, or what you've always sort of thought you would be, right? And so we realized over time, as we kept meeting in these 30-minute sessions, that this was a really efficient way of getting from that small circle to that much bigger circle. And of course, keeping in mind this is an iterative process, right? So you go into that big circle, then that becomes whatever you're doing in there becomes your comfort zone again. So you find your next, right? And so the idea that we've all, us, you guys who are all professional women who are really successful, so all of us have gotten to that bigger circle in our lives in different points, right? Different milestones that we've gone through. We may have not, what we're trying to say today is that, there's a role for whatever other tools you were using, right? So whether it was mentorship or whether it was using your personal connections or developing new skill sets or what have you, to get you to that bigger circle, that's great. What we're saying though, is what we've come to realize really sort of in mid-career, right? Yeah. So this was not at all something that we realized earlier, and if we did, maybe it would have made a difference. But the idea is that peer coaching has been such a catalyst to move between those two circles, to go from that small circle to that big circle. It really just increased the efficiency and the speed at which we did that, as when I compare it to other sort of things that I've done in my career, right, to do that before. So anyway, having said that, we have some time, and we wanted to just first sort of go over what are those objectives? What did we actually achieve right after we made that leap, right? So we're talking in a lot of abstract, and so we're gonna now pin it down for you a little bit more, right? So some of the things that have come out of those peer-to-peer sessions are this right here, this webinar. So the series really was something we conceived during one of our peer-to-peers, and then we continued to work towards it, right? Other things, we both were very privileged to say that in the last couple of years, we've both had some professional advancement within our separate trajectories, right?
I'll say one of the things that I really wanted to start doing was writing more and research and publishing, which I found extremely daunting. But Sasan had a lot more experience and was really a great support when I started really writing and helping me become.
Yeah, and again, so another one I can think of is, again, so it starts off in the professional realm, but obviously, it also moves into the personal, right? So quite a few things. So yeah, in the personal realm, she laughs because, so we committed to a specific lifestyle change a couple of years ago. One of us has been a little bit more successful, but nonetheless, we're both consistent. We're both better than where we started, right?
Sure.
And so, the idea here being, again, that these are really measurable outcomes, right? These are not, we don't just feel better, right? That too. But we really are seeing sort of an accelerated advancement towards our goals because of these peer sessions. So having said that, we wanted to take a few minutes and get your opinions, really, and get your thoughts. We do want this to be a conversation. Yes. So tell us.
Yes, so we would love to hear from you. What do we want to hear? Everything. We want to know if you have a peer, if you think there's somebody that you're thinking about that may be a good peer for you. Perhaps it could be a connector between two people who you think would be good peers. What has worked for you? What has not worked for you? Does this resonate? Before we say more about sort of a framework that we'd like to share with you, we want to hear what resonates with you. So this is not complete chaos. We would like you to raise your hand if you want to speak, and Reem will unmute you. Alternatively, if you would like to send a question through the chat, Sasan, I believe you are, able to see the chat, and we will go ahead and take your questions as they come, okay? So please feel free to unmute yourself. I'm sorry, not to raise your hand, and then we'll unmute you, and send questions in the chat. We would love to hear from you. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to get going here. Let me see the chat.
I can see the chat, but I don't know if I can see people.
All right. Reem, you let us know if anybody has raised their hand as well. Okay. We'll give everybody a minute to do that. Should I start off with a question?
Well, I mean, let's first see.
Anybody?
I think I raised my hand by mistake. Okay. So yeah, I mean, please feel free to chat. We really
would love to hear,
because
this is not, I mean, this is really truly our personal story, and we would love to hear what your personal journey has been. So no need to be shy. There's no right or wrong answer here. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
All right, so we're waiting for people to share. What we can do is maybe provide a little bit more.
I think what I think needs to be said is that this journey is not without its challenges.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be sort of honest and open to say, yeah, peer-to-peer can be extremely good, but it doesn't necessarily come easy. And I think one of the things I've learned is that Sasan and I are extremely different in most things. So for me, adapting to her way of functioning was quite challenging. And vice versa.
I agree. We are very different. I see some people are informing me they're having a hard time unmuting. You just need to raise your hand. Cache has her hand up. Reem, do you mind unmuting Cache?
Hey there, everyone. This is Cache. I'm a department administrator at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. And I think one thing that has been super impactful for me is not only having someone who's different than me to serve as a peer mentor or a mentor in general, but also finding someone who does have a similar personality. Because, can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Because I feel like with my style of leading, at times it can be difficult to receive feedback from folks who are different than me because they're answering from their frame of reference. And I'll just share one of the mentors that I think I have a similar leading style to and personality type to is Roba, who's our executive director. So it was
Okay.
super helpful going to her and saying, this is how I handled that situation. Given you've been in my position before and perhaps the same situation, can you give me any feedback based on your growth on how you would deal with this moving forward? And it's so nice to hear from others who have experienced those similar challenges, because I feel like I resonate with that more and can relate more um, when they've perhaps made the same mistakes that I have or been in a similar situation. It's easier for me to kind of take that information, digest it, and then move forward after that.
That's really awesome. Thank you for sharing, Kesha, because I agree with you. In fact, we're going to say that in a couple of slides from now, that there are some things that when you do share some things in common with your peer, who you're having this relationship with, it actually helps. It just facilitates things. Like you said, they can understand where you're coming from. They've already done these mistakes, or they can anticipate what mistakes you might make, right? And so I agree with you. It does help to have some similarity. But there is also something to be said for the diversity, and I'm sure you agree with us. There is something to be said for the diversity of experience and the diversity of perspective, right? But absolutely.
And I think over time, I'll tell you, Nishi, that I think I have become more like Sassen, and Sassen have become more like me. We were melding into like one person, which is like, is it super weird? Superwoman. Maybe superwoman or super weird, whichever way. But yeah, absolutely. So thank you for your comment. I think this is extremely important to note, and again, I will come back to that in a little bit.
I think Deidre also has her hand up. If you don't mind, Reem, I'm moving Deidre. I think Deidre is still muted. Are you able to unmute her, Reem? Oh, I think Lena's been unmuted. We have a few people here who have their hands up. So whoever, I think Lena's unmuted. Lena, can you?
Hello. Hello. Well, thanks for having me. This is such a valuable topic. And I'm bonjour Pascal, je suis de Montréal aussi. Et ouais, je vous suis depuis très, enfin, je vous connais de la communauté. So with your sister. And, I knew you. I'm sorry.
What has been your experience? We can't wait to hear.
Yes, absolutely. I work in the more corporate side of things. My background is I'm a healthcare professional as well, but I navigate within the medical sector, and I'm very, very pleased that you've accepted me to join. I work for Draeger Medical, and we specialize in anesthesia, equipment, and ventilators as well. So the thing is, I find what you're saying really valuable. I have never been comfortable approaching my peers, given that it's a very competitive environment that I operate in, approaching my peers for feedback or for mentoring. So that's why I often go outside and find that help outside of people that I work with. I never feel comfortable. And I know somebody else was saying that you feel you want to be with somebody who's your equal, even though it might be perceived as if you're looking for help or you're weak if it's within your field. So that's why I'm reaching out. And I wonder how what skills would you approach, would you use if you were to approach somebody who's actually working with you, so they don't perceive it as somebody asking for help or not capable or whatnot.
It's interesting. Thank you for your question, Lana. Thank you so much. That's a great question. And I think this is where I think this is particularly good for women. Because I think as a general rule, the same way when I met, Sassen, I had nothing to offer in return, but yet her sort of generous, nurturing nature allowed us to just oblige me and to give me that first audience over coffee. And I think this is something that we do very well as women.
We do. I agree with you, but I have to say, I think, Lena's comment about being careful about who you choose, right? Because you're right. It does take a level of vulnerability to do that, right? You're exposing sort of your doubts. Whatever those doubts are, doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have expertise. You just you just want some guidance or what have you. So you have to choose wisely, and that's part of actually our next part is how do you actually do this? What is that secret sauce? How do you choose the right person? What are some of the things you look for in that person? And oftentimes it's not someone you're going to start that relationship with in a moment of need. It's usually somebody where you've started. So when she came to me with her questions initially, she wasn't looking for a peer relationship. She really had just a checklist of answers. She just used me basically. And then later on, she said, hey, that person might have some value, right? And I felt the same way. So it really didn't, so that's a long answer to say that oftentimes you have to have already established some sort of trust before you make that jump.
Yeah, you make that leap.
So that's really important, and I agree with you. It's not everybody that you want to go up to and just say, hey, do you want to be a peer coach? We have, yes, Deidre, please go ahead. You're unmuted.
Hi. Yes. I was a little opposite of what Cachet was speaking of. I could tend to be a little more on the I guess more aggressive side. So I guess I'd be paired up with somebody that's a little toned down to be a little softer. So coming here in the Middle East, I've learned a lot to soften up my approach and to to learn the softer side to of the words like they use soft reminder or gentle reminder as opposed to
Interesting.
So I'm used to so that's worked well for me since I've been here since 2014. But I had one question. My question was, at what point in your career did you identify, that you had to move from your comfort zone, into that place, into your sweet zone, to that sweet area where the magic happens?
Yeah.
I think you always have an inkling that you're trying to get somewhere, but you're so bogged down for myself in my to-do list that, so for me, I never really put a lot of time and energy into thinking more strategically. And I think this is where sort of mid-career, right? We're both in our mid-40s at this point. We're out of med school, 20 something years. And in terms of timing, this is when I realized, okay, I have some mental energy to do this, but I need somebody to do it with. Right. And I think this is why the timing was so good for the both of us, because we had reached that point where we could spend some mental, and we knew what we sort of kind of had a sense, but we needed to refine it. And this is what we did for each other, essentially.
Absolutely. And to go to your point about sort of being gentler and changing your approach, a lot of what we do, a lot of our talk with each other is about changing approaches, basically, because oftentimes it is that sees that and says, wait a minute. You need to change this a little because it just isn't reflecting you at your best to that individual. And so it can be anything from what you're dressed like today, So one of the things I literally said to her is that, look, you got to stop wearing scrubs every single day, right? If you want to be seen as sort of something other than an endoscopist, right? And so if you're going towards this goal, you really have to start sort of dressing that part. People have to start seeing you this way, right? And so it's that female touch or that sort of female perspective that really, I think, and getting it from another female, really adds a lot of credibility to and actually affects change as well, because again, you're somebody maybe who came to a culture where subliminal messaging is more appreciated than directness, for example. And so you need that person who's able to say that to you. You know what? Your point is absolutely right, but maybe you want to package it this way. So thank you for sharing that, Deidre. We have a lot. So we have wow. So we have Isam, please go ahead and tell us your opinion. This is our first male participant.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi.
Yes, hi. My name is Assam. I'm a small-time lawyer in Abu Dhabi. I'm Sudanese. I'm a male. I'm not a scientist of any sort. and so on. Well, thank you for such a riveting speech and recounting your experience. Mentoring has been known, since time immemorial, in one way, form or another. The upshot of all of this is that it has developed and sort of polished over the years, given issues over sex and racial discrimination and so on and so forth. So there's so many boundaries you have to be within and so on and so forth. It helps you to navigate professional challenges and helps you to develop. My question is that obviously you two are high flyers. You come from distinguished academic institutions from the US or Canada and so on. How do you think your experience would have been if it had been in other parts of the world, say Asia or Africa or the Middle East and so on and so forth? How do you see mentoring working? Personally, and as a lawyer, I was mentored by a very hard-hitting sort of lawyer whom I worked with. And despite the harshness, I have always come to appreciate that sort of style. It's a culture issue. Today this will not be accepted and so on, but it benefits you in one way or the other. So we always have to put these experiences in perspective. This is what I wanted. This is abstract. That there's so many the area is fraught with the positive stuff and the negative stuff. But thank you so much for for this. It just brings things to to light, and and thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really, really insightful comments. And I think you bring a really important point. I'm going to take a stab at it if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So I think I'm lucky enough to worked in sort of served, sort of below middle income sort of situation, settings, and those settings tend to be in that world extremely hierarchical, right? So that the mentor model is extremely influential, not just for you on a personal level, but even from a connectedness, sort of big shot connections and so on to move you forward. Unfortunately, most times in those settings, the peer role is extremely competitive by nature because the opportunities are so few, right? So all the peers are sort of competing with each other, and that's an exact setting where peer coaching may not be as effective, right? It's not 100%, of course. There are always pockets of people who will move you up with them. But I think, generally speaking, if I were to generalize, it is harder to have sort of a peer coaching model in those settings. So really important for you to bring us back down to sort of earth and let us and be very clear about the fact that we are talking about specified settings, right? Where these models do work for sure. There's just so much we can say, honestly.
Perhaps this is a good segue into it, because this was such a good, it's a really good question. And the next things that we really want to talk about, well, what do we think works? What do we think are the essential pieces that would make this work? And I think, thank you for your question. I think this is the perfect segue, but I do want to say that we'll have plenty of time at the end for a lot of other questions. So don't leave, right at 8, don't leave, we'll stay behind. We'd love to continue this conversation.
Maybe we may stop the recording, but you're more than welcome to
We'll continue, absolutely. So what is the secret sauce, and
what is the secret sauce? So the secret sauce has a few components that we'd like to put forth. The first is, of course, what we talked about, trust, right? So we mentioned it earlier, it is just the base of this entire endeavor, right? And oftentimes that trust is not established at the moment of establishing peer coaching. In fact, when we talk about peer coaching, by the way, guys, we're talking about, I should say ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about something that we're looking at in retrospect. We now realize what we were doing was peer coaching, right? But when we started it, didn't know it was. We just thought it was sessions to move us forward, right? And so we didn't have a fancy name to it, but we had established trust, right? She walked us through several intimate, deeply personal sort of trust fostering, occasions that led us to a peer coaching relationship. So it really is the foundation. When we say trust, we mean not just trust about, keeping your confidentiality and giving you good advice, but trust about that person really has your best interest in mind, truly has your best interest in mind. And that takes time to sort of figure out and be aware and be sure of. The next really important piece is structure and clarity. This was, I mean, all Pascal, I have to say. We are so different in how we view or feel the world. I'm much more sort of open-ended. I'm happy with I'm happy with ambiguity. I'm okay with with spaces that are not necessarily limited. And Pascal is just a sort of task to-do list. This is what we're going to do person. And that's actually really important. So I struggled, to be honest, in our first 6 months, because oftentimes these sessions were Pascal coming in, knowing what she wants, and us sort of talking about it, but then me saying, okay, well, what did I get out of this? And so I have to say that, over time, what she's done is add structure, right? So she's giving me frameworks to think about. So let's think about big goals, small goals, middle goals. How are we going to get through here, right? So structure means that the session is structured, not only that you have an agenda, but also means that when you post session, you have a sense of what you're supposed to be doing. Pre-session, you might prep a little bit so that it don't look so disorganized. But the idea is that the structure and clarity is extremely important in these sessions. It has to be balanced, right? It has to be balanced. That means that both parties really should have time dedicated to their goals relatively equally over time, right? It doesn't mean that every session has to be equal, right? And in the beginning, actually, a lot of it was Pascal.
Because that was organized.
And then it sort of, became more balanced over time. So, but it's important that you do both acknowledge that I'm seeing this, and this is where we need to go. We need to be a little bit balanced too.
And eventually our goals sort of merge, right? A lot of our goals, like this webinar, became a common goal that we eventually worked towards together.
Right. Diversity, this goes actually to that point.
The question.
I think it was Kesha. Yeah. So the question is, obviously I think most of us believe diversity is important, right? It brings a lot to the table. Being so different, she brought different perspectives. She has different experience. She has different background. She has a lot of things that are different from me. However, the piece that really we found has to be uniform is actually sort of values, personal values, priorities, general personal ways that you view the world. Really, we're not saying it's a must, but it helps so much, right? Because I intuitively know, even though we're different, I can see something and get to the essence of what's important for her because I know who she is, because it's very similar to what I am at a very essential sort of level. And so it's hard to articulate except to say that you just want to make sure that it's easy for your coach to coach you. And so you have to select that person who really has at their core something very similar to you, right? And then lastly, commitment. And again, commitment not in terms of time, right? So of course there's time commitment that's important. But what we mean by commitment is a real personal commitment, so that, that person is in your head, all right? So what that means is that I think, so for example, I'll be sitting in a meeting and I'll be like, what? This person is really going to be important for Pascal's goal. I'm going to make sure that I connect them afterwards, for example. Or, just taking the time to notice things like, sometimes emails, and I'll look at some of her emails I'm succeed on, and I'm like, well, why do you keep using this self-deprecating language? Stop using this word, stop saying so, whatever it is. But the point is there's a commitment to the point where, of course, you start off with half-hour sessions per week, and now it's snowballed to, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and WhatsApp and say, hey, I just thought of something that I think is really going to be important for you. Let's talk about this at our next session. So that level of commitment is really, really sort of key.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're already at 8 o'clock, so we're gonna go through that last
slide along. So we wanted to also share with you why we thought this worked so well for women. It is, after all, the Women in Health series. So the first thing, and I think the most important point, and I'll make it first, is that we need it. We absolutely desperately need it, because as women, we know we are under-mentored, we are under-sponsored, and it's incredibly hard for us to find people, right? So if that person is within your reach, you may have that person around you already. You need to start looking, because that's a person that may get you to the next level of where you want to be. So one, we absolutely need it. Now, why is it more suited for women as well? It's true, it's easy. It's easy, right? It's easy. There's no inappropriateness. There's no awkwardness. And we have to be mindful of the world that we live in and all the possible connotation. But I think it's just made our relationships certainly grow very, very, very easily. And the next point, I guess, is that intuitively, because we have very similar shared experiences, she intuitively understands things like the demand on my time, right? So she understands that if we're going to set up a meeting on a Friday afternoon to talk about a big goal, well, that's great, but I've got 2 kids. So do I bring my kids to play with your kids? Okay. Then we'll bring all the kids together to play, and we have some peace, and we talk. So this is sort of intuitively what I think another woman can really truly understand. And I think the fourth piece is that I think it's important for us to take advantage of that sort of high EQ that we have, right? The little things that I notice when Sasan gives a talk, I'm like, you have to stop using this term, you're repeating yourself and picking up things. Again, what I think
Reading the room
on her behalf, right? When you say that, I have to say, I don't think people were particularly happy, or that brought out a lot of positive energy when you brought up that point. So again, reading the room, that EQ piece, that emotional, intelligence that women tend to have very well developed. Not to say that men don't have it, but certainly I think as women, it's an advantage that we need to take advantage, to take advantage of. So I know we're a little bit over the time limit, but I cannot not put that slide that Nelson worked really hard to make. So here, what are we saying? What are we saying? We're saying that your peer is probably out there, but that you have to find your Wally, right? You have to find him, actually, probably her, find your Wanda. That's very cute, corny, but you guys get the point. You guys get the point. We would like to thank all of you for being here tonight. For those of you who have to leave, please make note. These are our Twitter handles. DM us, share your experience, share your ideas. We'd love to hear from you. For those of you who can stay back, we would love to keep you here too. And what we'll do is that we'll stop the recording and take your questions and have a lively discussion that won't be recorded thereafter. And I do want to say that we're coming back. Women in Health series is coming back. In about 3 months, we'll have our next webinar on an equally engaging and interesting and essential topic. And we certainly look forward to having a lot of you guys there.
So, Reem, if you don't mind.